thank you very much. And welcome everybody. Welcome to our first PBEC webinar of the year. A very happy 2022 to all of you. And this morning or this evening, wherever you are, we're going to be talking about supply chain transparency. And of course, on the news, we've been hearing a lot about what is going on with regards to bottlenecks around the world. We've been hearing a lot about the need for more transparency and more visibility across those supply chains. But equally, we've also been hearing a lot from the likes of COP26 saying how we all need to work together in this current climate change emergency. So I think there's a lot of interesting discussions that we're going to have this morning, Mike. And again, I would encourage all of you to please ask those questions. You know, if you have any comments, if you agree, or even if you disagree, please feel free to share your thoughts with us. So as Mike mentioned, I'm your moderator for the session. I'm also a director on the board of PBEC. I also head up consumer and retail for Asia Pacific at KPMG. And I'm also looking at other areas such as tech and innovation. But I'm also joined, and I have to say, I have a great panel of speakers to share with you this today. And that is Dr. John Kent. John is the senior fellow at the Bush China Foundation. He's also the director of supply chain initiatives and a clinical professor for the Department of Supply Chain Management at the Sam W. Walton College at the Business University of Arkansas. So great that John could join us. In addition, we also have Lindsay Hermes, the head of enterprise solutions at Sarai. And you might be asking yourself, well, who's Sarai? A very, very interesting business. I have to say, Lindsay, you are probably one of the best funded startups that I know here in town. But Sarai, quickly, Sarai is the B2B platform for manufacturing and sourcing powered by HSBC. And I know Lindsay's going to be sharing her thoughts on the Sarai platform as well a little bit later on. And then a good friend of mine is also joining us from Malaysia, and that is Professor Neale O'Connor. Neale used to be here in Hong Kong, but he's over in Malaysia these days. In fact, he's over at the university, the Monash University in Malaysia as one of the department heads, but also he's also the co-founder of the China Sourcing Academy as well. And Neale and I have spoken at several events looking at the world of supply chain and sourcing. And then last but not least, we wanted to invite somebody from industry to come and join us. And I'm very happy to introduce Rob Davenport. Rob is the founder and CEO of Take Lifestyle and Take Foundation. And again, I am going to let Rob introduce what Take is all about. But again, you know, one of the exciting things that we do see is we do see the emergence of a number of businesses and brands that are also, I would say, are very purpose-led businesses. And, you know, how do they fit in to the supply chain? So I think we've got some really interesting conversations to have with all of those speakers. And what we're going to do, just the format, is that I'm going to invite John, Lindsay, and Neale to give us their views. What do they see in the marketplace? So I know that John doesn't have any slides, so John's going to give us just to share his observations. He's written a number of different papers. In fact, the most recent one was on supply chain diplomacy. So I'm really interested to hear what John has to say. I'm then going to ask Neale to give us a view on what's he seeing in terms of the shifting supply chain and manufacturing and sourcing landscape across, of course, China, Southeast Asia and South Asia. And then I'm going to ask Lindsay just to tell us a little bit more about the Sarai B2B platform. And then we're going to go into a discussion. We're going to have a Q&A panel. And as we said, we'd really encourage all of you to perhaps share your thoughts with us. So as Mike said, please ask your questions. If you feel that you want to share some of your ideas, please do so. And if you agree, that's great. Equally, if you disagree with any of us, please let us know in the chat option. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over to John. Good evening, John. How's everything with you?
Everything is very well. Thank you, Anson, for the introduction. Thank you, Michael. And it's my pleasure to be with this panel today. I'm going to focus primarily, as Anson mentioned, on a recent article. Actually, Dave Firestein and myself co-authored on our need for supply chain diplomacy. But I'm going to spend a couple of minutes of time talking about how did we get to this point to where we needed or where we feel we need supply chain diplomacy. And so I want everyone to think a little bit about global supply chains. And I'm going to make my comments in the context a little bit chronologically. I want to start with you thinking about from 1990 until 2017. I intentionally picked 1990 because that would be the midpoint in the George H.W. Bush presidency. And as many of you are aware, I'm a senior fellow at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. And so from that point until 2017 is where I want to spend a little bit of time. Then I want to spend just a minute or so on 2017 to the present. And I have titled that on my notes, Trade Wars, because I think that is probably the biggest reason that we need supply chain diplomacy. But we can't overlook the pandemic. And so I want you to think about 2020 to the present, because certainly the pandemic has had some impact on our global supply chains. And then the last period of time, which I'll spend hopefully most of my time, is on the future and supply chain diplomacy. So think about what I have actually titled here for my notes is Global Supply Chain Renaissance. And again, that's this era between this 27, 30-year period between 1990 and the current. Throughout that time, certainly from an education standpoint, I worked in industry in the late 80s and early 90s. My first trip to Asia was with Sealand Service. Some of you may remember Sealand. Maersk bought their assets and spent time in Japan and in China and Indonesia as part of my role there. But from a container ship standpoint, there have been over the 30-year period until recently, till the trade wars and the pandemic, moving containers around the world was almost free. When you look at the per cost basis for a pair of shoes, and I could go through many examples. So through that 30-year period, inflation pretty much stayed flat. Mega ships in the United States, our big innovation was domestic intermodal. And again, from the education standpoint, I started my work on my doctorate in the mid-90s, and I wrote a retail supply chain dissertation. As we all know, this idea, especially you, Anson, from your role at KPMG in retail, I don't even call it e-commerce anymore. It's just omni-channel commerce. Anytime, anywhere you want to place an order, It doesn't matter if it's a pair of customized Nike shoes manufactured in Vietnam. My son can order them tonight and he has them in a week or so. And so we just come to expect that. Bottom line, we had efficient, effective, even some companies considered a strategic competitive advantage of supply chain management. There are companies that we can talk about maybe on the panel about some of the best companies out there. So that was this period that I don't want to say came to a screeching halt, but I just said that. But certainly became disrupted in 2017 with the initial tariffs that are still in place, and then the second round, and then the third round. So again, the trade war period, and the tariffs add cost. So much that we talk about today is about inflation. Well, in John Kent's mind, there's a way we can just about as quickly as we put the tariffs in place, we could remove those tariffs and inflation would start to go down. There is a reason prices have gone up since 2017. It's the trade wars and it's the pandemic. And on my notes, I have trade wars plus pandemic equals inflation. As many of us, certainly myself, but observed, leadership in global trade since 2017 has been described as chaotic, inconsistent, and uncertain. And then lay over the pandemic from 2020 until now, and we get all kinds of inconsistency and variation, which add cost to the supply chain. I'm not going to present a formula for calculating reorder points or calculating inventory, but there's a standard deviation in there, and that measures variation. And so that variation that has been caused by the pandemic, partly, whether it's in manufacturing or transportation, in a port, in a wholesale distribution center, in a retail store, we all see this variation in the supply chain that has been created by the pandemic. So enter the idea of supply chain diplomacy. I think for many of the listeners or the viewers, you may be familiar with something called ping pong diplomacy. And that is just a mere 2 months ago in a conversation with David and I, we started talking about ping pong diplomacy and is there a way that we can take something fun and use that to be the centerpiece or the motivation for cooperation. So we feel that it's time for supply chain diplomacy. But again, I wanted to evoke the thought process of ping pong diplomacy. We feel that this diplomacy would allow us to cooperate, hopefully to focus on supply chain issues, the practical aspects of supply chain, and not be focused on the other, as we call them in our paper that we wrote, the clashes that are going on from a government level in the geopolitical area perspective. We can reduce the variation that has entered into our global economy because of the disruption of the trade wars and the pandemic. And once we restore those efficiencies, which would include or could include reducing the tariffs, as recently as today in the United States, Biden talked about our trade representative working on the tariffs, and that businesses in the I believe it was Reuters is where I saw the article. The businesses are anxious to get the tariffs removed for their consumers. Again, back to inflation, but also diplomacy from a relationship restoration perspective. Focus on rebuilding trust, and hopefully getting some consistency back into the direction, especially of our two largest economies in China and the United States. And then provide a vision, be able to articulate a vision for future supply chains that include a focus on sustainability that includes some potential decoupling of certain aspects, some of the sticky topics that we talk about in our paper. And then I'll finish off with what our thoughts are. These teams, these supply chain teams, haven't been formed yet, but this work is in process. This paper was actually, the paper was an idea from my dean, Dean Matt Waller, who's the dean of the Walton College of Business, who is, before becoming dean, he was the head of the supply chain department in the Walton College of Business. And he suggested to David and I that we take our ideas and we put them on paper, and we get that we start to socialize this idea of supply chain diplomacy. And in the paper, we talk about a team from the US and a team from China, maybe 6 people or so, industry and academics that are serving as diplomats. And their number one focus is to cooperate and to come up with solutions. We can already identify what I would call low-hanging fruit. And it's also balancing trade, balancing the physical trade. We need to fill the containers up going back to China. It's a basic transportation principle. You want your transportation, whether it's a train or a truck or a plane or a ship, you want it loaded in both directions. We can do that. And then work on the sticky issues too, whether it's decoupling or geographic diversification. Certainly an organization like the Pacific Basin Economic Council is an excellent place to talk about diversification as well. I will now conclude, or that concludes my comments, Anson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And again, you touched on so many good points there, and I really appreciate that. As you said, like the idea about the ping pong diplomacy, John, and the fact that, you know, we have seen all of these clashes and geopolitics. And as you also rightly pointed out, maybe we really do desperately need to have that mix of industry leaders together with academia to see how we can move the dial. So important. John, without a doubt, I've got lots of questions, but I'm going to come back to you during our discussion panel, if you don't mind, because I'd now like to move on, and I'd like to introduce my old buddy, Professor Dr. Neale O'Connor, over at Monash University, over in Malaysia, to share some of his thoughts, because Neale, as I said, has really, you know, he has in-depth knowledge of China, of the region. I always used to be very impressed how Neale would go off on his road trips across China to talk to those factories and the various sourcing players. So he really does have, I think, a deep knowledge on what we have seen across the whole of Asia. So good morning, Neale. How are you?
Good morning, Anson. Good morning, everyone, and afternoon or evening, wherever you are on this planet, this global planet, this global supply chain. And thank you, Anson, for the intro. I want to just give some context and probably alleviate some misconceptions about what we think is happening with the shifts of sourcing locations, especially in this area of the world. I've been studying the sourcing shifts publicly documented for the last 12 months, and we document 132 publicly announced shifts by companies around the world. Now, of course, that may be the tip of the iceberg, but we can get some context and understand what is really happening by looking at some data. So I want to show you some visuals, and this will help, especially with question time. We can go back and look at different misconceptions, and I'll summarize in about 5-6 minutes time. As you know, I've located this study by starting at 2017 and going all the way out to 2024. We are only documented statements made by C managers of these companies, not statements made by journalists or what you read in Forbes and a study here, a study there. We have actually looked at annual reports and forward-looking statements to understand what's going on in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Okay, so let's go through some of these, what we're looking at in terms of which countries. Here's all the companies that we have documented, and no harm in showing these because these are all public listed companies. Notice 132, only 45 are US owned. A lot of Japanese, Taiwanese, even Chinese owned organizations. What about the US? Is it the US that are making the shift? No. And are the majority of these 132 companies that are making the shift? No. I count 11 that have documented that we are moving out of China and we're not going back. Even Harley-Davidson, they were in the process of setting up their factory north of Shanghai, and they pulled out before they did run at rate and then moved to Thailand. So in all of this, we only count 5 out of the 132, 5 US companies that are closing up in China, and as you can see. So what about, where did they go to? Where is the sourcing capacity moved to? Because we're talking about sourcing capacity. We're not talking about closing factories in China and moving to another country. And for the most part, it kind of like Nike, where they closed up a lot of their orders in China and just went to their 116 contract manufacturers in Vietnam. Very easy to do for a lot of these large multinationals who, like Hasbro, they rely on contract manufacturing. It's very easy for them to move their sourcing. For them, it's more an order shift rather than a sourcing shift. But what about the companies that are moving to another country for the very first time? I've labeled them as blue sourcing shifts. And as you can see here, the red sourcing shifts tend to dominate. That is, there are moves to other countries where companies already have capacity in those countries. And if I just show you on a country-to-country level, just briefly show you some more visuals. By the way, electronics dominates by sports and outdoor, auto, then industrial, and then household. But let's have a look. If we go to India, and most of the companies that moved out of China, sourcing shift out of China, went to Vietnam. But if we talk about the total capacity moved, the equivalent capacity moved to other countries, the big shift has happened and it's moved to India by a fewer number of companies, whereas the largest number of companies went to Vietnam, but with smaller capacities. Now, it's very interesting that you get that contrast. We can look at the FDI inflow and how that affects things. But here's one misnomer I want to clarify, that not everyone moved back to the USA. I'm sorry, it didn't happen. All right, I need to count 17 that have announced that they're moving capacity back to the USA. And a majority of them already have capacity in the USA anyway. So 17 out of 132 out of 44 US-owned organizations. What about Vietnam? Well, Vietnam is not Vietnam, and the North Vietnam is certainly sprung to life because there's a lot of electronic sourcing shift going to North Vietnam. They have a lot of technology parks and get this, 12 hours truck ride just south from Hong Kong. We can get to Hanoi. So you have different options for moving raw materials, for moving parts of your ecosystem. In some ways, North Vietnam is attached to the Guangdong ecosystem because of its physical close location. South Vietnam, well, that's just taken over Bangladesh as the largest textile footwear exporter, apart from China. So they're second largest in the world. Bangladesh used to be the second largest. Now Vietnam is the second largest. And so you'll find that the sourcing shift to South Vietnam were much smaller and dominated by household, sports and outdoor, and some electronics. Whereas the North, much more into components, smartphones and electronics. Now, I'm not going to go through every country. I just want to show you some contrasts. Not every country is the same. So moving back to Taiwan is basically a reversal of what happened in the last 2 decades, where the HTCs, the ASUS, the ACES, and the big multinationals of Taiwan forced their supply chain to move to China for low cost. Well, now that supply chain is moving back to Taiwan, and lo and behold, a lot of that is some kind of geopolitically risk motivated. And so we're back to India, and we'll move on to some summaries, what we've got here. A lot of the shift to India is much larger. And you can imagine that if I go to India, it's not to immediately replace what I've moved from China, but going to India is a decade-long plan, because the audience knows that India does not have that ecosystem or the logistics efficiency that China has and some of the other Southeast Asian countries have. But one big note is that the shifts to India were large scale and definitely dominated by electronics. I can see in a decade time that India can be a huge competitor to some of the electronic ecosystems in China. So different countries, horses for courses, a big thing to take away. Thailand, your usual suspects, electronics is dominated. Most of the move is going there, not for the first time, but already established factories. Mexico, already established factories. Very little of the shift is going to Mexico for the first time. Again, this is a challenge when you go into a country for the first time. Mexico is no more difficult than going into a Southeast Asian country. There are always procedures, bureaucracies, and everything like that. You don't just go to Mexico because you're close to the market. You still have barriers to entry and going through the bureaucracy and setting things up, etc. There's many other countries, but let's just take this. What are we learning in terms of, can we predict the reasons for the sourcing shift? And this is something that we wanted to get into as I summarize what I'm talking about. Many of us think, oh, it's a trade war, it's geopolitical risk, it's low-cost labor, and it's incentives from other countries. It is all them, but there's more. We counted 17, we documented 17 content analyzed, and through the 132 companies in their reports, there's over 611 documented reasons for why they are moving. And of course, issues from USA, incentives from the receiving country basically dominate. And they're kind of like 1/3, probably about 40-45% each. Issues from China, less so. And so it's very interesting that when we try and use that detail to predict, okay, which of these issues is predicting a move to Vietnam? Again, this is the academic side now, but we want to let the data do the talking and not the politics do the talking or the journalists. And I'm very big on understanding the data. If we want to go to Vietnam, what is coming out is that the date of relocation, if that was more recent, there was more recent shifts to Vietnam. If the cost of the land, that in China, that drove the shift to Vietnam. The availability of raw materials, that drove the shift to Vietnam. But if contrast that with Taiwan, Mexico, the move to those companies were dominated by the companies US owned. And to India, the scope to improve the supply chain. As I said, India, logistics needs a greater improvement. So if you're going there to scope to improve the supply chain, that's a huge incentive to go to India. Let me just stop there. Again, I'm bringing context. And number two, to try and clear up misconceptions about where all the sourcing shift is going. Thank you, Anson.
Neale, excellent, and really appreciate your sharing along with John's sharing. I love that last point that you mentioned about you really want the data to do the talking and not the politics. I absolutely agree with that point. And you had, as I said, I know you've spoken to a lot of the C-suite. I know you've spoken to a lot of those factories across China and elsewhere. So fascinating to see those moves. As you said, there's actually lots and lots of reasons of why we're seeing those sourcing shifts. It's not just purely down to this US-China trade war, because of course, a lot of companies, as we know, are looking at more of a diversification strategy, right? They don't want to have all of their eggs in one basket nowadays. Okay, great. So we've heard from John, we've heard from Neale. I'm now going to hand over to my very good friend, Lindsay, over at Sarai. to share with us a little bit about, well, what, who and what is Sarai? What are you guys doing? And then equally, Lindsay, perhaps you can also share with everybody the recent findings of our joint thought leadership paper.
I'd be glad to. Thanks so much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure. So let's demystify a little bit about who Sarai is. We were founded in 2019, spun out of HSBC, as Anson mentioned. We are very well funded, but we have a mission to simplify global trade, because with the bank and its origins in trade, not a whole lot's changed over the last 150 plus years. And that's what we're on a path to simplify. We have over 100 employees located here in Hong Kong, as well as a few representatives around the world. We have great partnerships. And what I'm going to tell you about today is what some of the world's biggest global brands and manufacturers are using to up their transparency game. What do we do today? So for SMEs, we have a public network where they can network and trade, search, find, and connect with one of them, each other easily. And what I focus on with my team at Sarai is supply chain solutions. So when we talk about supply chain solutions, we're talking about visibility. So you can collect more information on who you're doing business with, as well as traceability. So large enterprises can understand what raw materials are in their finished goods. We focused on the apparel industry to start, though we are built in a very agnostic way, and we will be branching out soon. I'm really excited to show more about our growth, but particularly with our report with KPMG, we have Moving the Needle, Threading a Sustainable Future for Apparel. This was conducted with over 200 senior executives in the industry and a diverse geographic mix of their input. Anson, you mentioned COP26 earlier, and it's incredibly timely, this report. So we're taking all of the mystery out of the shifts taking place in the industry. Transparency is a must-have. It's not just a nice to have anymore. And companies have committed to be more transparent about their businesses, and they're looking for solutions. Well, good news, those solutions already exist. Hopefully the themes from this report will resonate with many industries, and I do encourage you to take a read through. I'll share a couple quick findings because it's quite fascinating. Transparency really is a driver for sustainability. How many companies are greenwashing that don't know what's in their products and where their supply chains are located? This is what the crux of the report does cover around the importance of supply chain transparency. You have to know. And good news, everybody is finding this extremely important or somewhat important. It's a priority for brands that have, you all recognize these logos, they've signed this fashion charter, meaning that they're making a public commitment. And as a result of COP26, these pledges to be net zero, well, it's time to make good on them. In order to do this properly, companies need to know where their suppliers are and what the potential for reduction is, where that is the greatest. For some brands, transparency is in their DNA, but for others, it's a massive shift from the way that they are doing business today. Let's take a look at the key drivers here. Internal and external drivers are giving companies across the supply chain a real sense of urgency to change. We're all familiar with the internal drivers, but externally, there are a couple specifics in apparel that are really causing this shift. Gen Z, they are more vocal than any other generation. They've got phones in their back pockets and they'll tell you all about how they feel repeatedly. And they want to spend where they know their money is going to make an impact. Now, investors are also looking to make an impact and are basing their decisions on ESG goals. But regulation is accelerating the demands for transparency and accountability. We see this in the US, Canada, Germany, UK, and more countries will be following suit. Corporate reputation is important not only to the brands and retailers, but also to the suppliers. This finding is quite striking. And why should they care? Because our study found that aside from having a positive impact on corporate reputation, if you take a sustainable approach, you can boost your net margins by 1 to 1.5% for apparel brands and by 1.5 to 2.5% for suppliers. That's a healthy margin to add. So what do we mean when we say transparency? We're talking about visibility, who is in your supply chain, and traceability, the knowledge of how your products are made and where your raw materials are from. And despite that growth opportunity I mentioned, some industry has what's needed, and it's not that great. But look at these numbers. Only nearly 20% have visibility in their supply chain, and only 15% have full traceability in your supply chain. That's room for a lot of exposure to risk and disruption. How are they tracking if they do have that transparency? You know, the way information is being captured is incredibly inefficient. The majority of respondents are tracking it manually through spreadsheets, emails, WeChats, WhatsApps, and that level of digitization, even in the pandemic, though it did increase within the supply chain, it did not necessarily increase, and it still remains low. There's a lot of work to be done on the enablers to transparency. So what is preventing transparency? I love this visualization. It's based off of a real use case of one of our clients whose cotton, you can see their finished good. You know, it's gone through many transformative processes just for one single pair of trousers. And with that, these barriers are real and they exist no matter how big or small your company is. High initial investment to implement a system, hard to obtain and manage data from other players, and insufficient resources to manage traceability. So with that, I'll end there, but I'm happy to dive into more of the full report. Encourage you to check it out as well, and look forward to talking with the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. And again, Lindsay, I think you also pinpoint you know, of course, geopolitics is happening everywhere. But as you said, one of the interesting things that you and I have been talking about is this perfect storm that's emerging. Governments are now starting to regulate. We're going to see, I think, as you mentioned, we're going to see a heck of a lot more regulation coming down the pipes, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Germany, in France, in the UK. You know, you and I were talking about, you know, and we kind of documented all of this regulation that is now coming down the pipes. And then equally, as we said, corporate reputation, that's a very key driver. Corporates now realize that they have got to step up. They've got to do a better job. And you already mentioned the consumers, right? We've got these key drivers. Those consumers are really going to look at driving change, right? And they're quite happy. These Gen Z consumers, they're tech savvy, they're digitally minded, and they're, I think, a lot more socially aware. And so they will call you out. And then equally, I think the interesting thing, Lindsay, is the banks, right? So now the financiers are also now asking you to demonstrate that you have a sustainability agenda. So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts, and we've got the media, right? The media, every day you see the various media channels, every day they're talking about the climate change. They're talking about the climate emergency. So there's a lot of things there that we need to be thinking about. So again, I just want to say a big thank you to John, Neale, and to Lindsay for sharing with us those different points of view, because it's a jigsaw puzzle, right? We've got lots of different pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to pull together. Now, I've got lots of questions. I noticed we've got a number of questions coming in. Again, a very big thank you for sharing those questions. I am going to get to those questions as well. Just bear with me for a few minutes. But I also want to bring in Rob Davenport. the founder CEO of the Take Lifestyle Take Foundation. Rob, do you want to just very quickly just share with all of us a little bit about what you're about and what you're looking to achieve?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Anson, for the introduction. So my name is Rob Davenport. I'm from the Take Group. So essentially what we want to do is empower change through bamboo, creating a better future for all. So what does that mean? So basically we have a couple of facets to the group. One is our Take Foundation. So essentially the foundation, what we want to do is use bamboo for a few things. One is to assist with climate change, as Anson mentioned earlier on, with COP26 and a lot of noise going on with brands essentially looking to strive towards carbon neutrality. Bamboo is a very good material for soaking up CO2 from the atmosphere. It absorbs 35% more CO2 than other materials. Also releases oxygen into our ecosystem. So essentially what we wanted to do is use this amazing tool to help with climate change. On the other side, we have our Take lifestyle products. So what we've done is made a very nice self-sustaining ecosystem. One of our brand values is creating value at a local level. So what we're doing with the foundation is making big bamboo farms locally in Hong Kong to give jobs to disadvantaged groups, prioritizing people with disabilities, elderly community, and essentially using the bamboo as a tool to help people empower themselves, teaching them new skills, and also as part of a bigger picture, essentially everyone working together, striving towards the greater good. And then what we're actually doing is we vertically integrated our supply chain. So we're building a factory locally in Hong Kong, where we'll use the locally grown bamboo. We've made a new material that's more biodegradable than others, essentially using bamboo as a replacement for single-use plastic, that will then manufacture our product locally in Hong Kong. So grown in Hong Kong, made in Hong Kong for Hong Kong. So for us, basically with this value chain, we want to use technology, strategic partnerships. I think finding advisors and very relevant on the panel today on how we can build that trust with consumers. Like Anson said, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. As a purpose-led brand, we're basically building things from the ground up. We want to make sure we get it right. Consumers are very savvy these days, specifically the millennials, the Gen X, the Gen Z. People are aware that they need to do something different. And for us, you know, using technology and data and platforms and building trust throughout the whole supply chain, you know, there's a very good opportunity, I think, as a purpose-led brand to enable people to make a difference and empower them to make change for the greater good.
Thanks for that sharing. And again, just it's interesting, isn't it? It's, you know, really about building trust with the consumers. That's going to be a key driver for the future. But as you said, grown in Hong Kong, made in Hong Kong, for Hong Kong, right? So, you know, I think we are going to, of course, going to see a lot of different options emerge in the future as well. Rob, I've got lots of other questions. We'll come back to you momentarily. I have also noticed that there's lots of questions in the chat box, and I was going to just say very quickly, I know that James Cunningham had a couple of questions. I was going to perhaps ask John very briefly just to kind of get his thoughts, because James was talking about if we look at things like raw material manufacturing areas, we are now seeing, you know, greater affluence and the people wanting better paid jobs. Where will consumer goods be manufactured in the future, John? Because I think the interesting thing, and again, Neale, this is a good point. You know, when you and I were kind of traipsing around China all those years ago, the cost of labor was very, very low. And as we know, it's certainly across China. You know, one thing that has happened is, you know, China is very successfully brought millions of people out of poverty. They are now the rising middle class, the high net worth individuals, and so on. But the interesting thing is, where can we go now, John or Neil? But I'll start with you, John. Where can we go now if we want to get our goods manufactured cheaply?
I think there's several options as we have learned with more focus on supply chain. That is one aspect or one variable in the total cost, or in supply chain, what we call the total landed cost. What does it cost you to bring the raw material to the manufacturer? What does it cost to buy the raw material? What does it cost to the labor, which is your specific question, the low cost of labor for manufacture, but what does it cost to transport that product to wherever it needs to go? Not only what does it cost the consumer, this inflation that we're seeing significantly, but to certainly to not just to Rob's point, but to Rob's point, what does it cost us from an environmental standpoint? So supply chains are some of the best places to look to reduce carbon and that aspect of cost. So a total landed cost is what we look at in supply chain, of which one component is labor. In thinking about this question and being able to at least give some specifics, when you look at the multinationals around the world, they're called multinationals for a reason, and there are many of them in various parts of the world. But a corporation, I'm sure some of you have heard of, maybe all of you, Gartner. They rank the top 25, and actually what I'm looking at on my other screen is the top 30 companies for their supply chain. And if you start looking at these, many of them are multinationals. McDonald's, Apple, Amazon, P&G, Unilever, Colgate, Palmolive, Johnson & Johnson. I'm not going to list all 25, but on and on. And these companies, they have already been using techniques to help them to optimize. LlamaSoft comes to mind, to help them to look at their network, to look at their customers, to look at the emerging markets, to look at labor costs, to your question, and to adjust their network. And one thing that we must thank Donald Trump for is disrupting this well-oiled machine that we had that was moving along. Well, it's disrupted. And if you're going to innovate, you need disruption. And so it's certainly time to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But that disruption has caused companies to start to evaluate. And what we're learning are things that Neil pointed out. Those of us that look at the data, it may be lower costs, but is there capacity? In the United States, one of the things that is so perplexing to me is we say on the media and the politicians, we want to move these manufacturing jobs back to the United States, but then the companies that are here are having trouble finding employees to work in the factories that we already have. And so there's that pull and tug, and I'm going to be quiet, but I wanted to bring in that total landed cost idea, of which one is labor, and that's not always the best solution for the consumer.
John, that's again great points. I love your point around if you are going to innovate, you need disruption. And we've certainly seen a lot of disruption in the last couple of years. And I think that's interesting because, Neil, I've got lots of questions. I'm going to try and get around to the various questions as well that are being posted. But Neil, you and I, we've seen in the last few years how those manufacturers are diversifying their production locations. Obviously, as we know, Southeast Asia, South Asia, these are places that are proving quite popular. You've just spent, I think, quite at length talking about Vietnam and how we need to split Vietnam into the north and the south part of Vietnam. But what do business executives need to bear in mind when they are going to be, when they're looking to move?
Very simple. Don't move for one factor alone. So, like, if someone come to me now, sure, move to Vietnam, probably too late. If you're an SME, don't do it, because number one, apart from border closures, it takes a long time to get senior personnel on the ground in Vietnam to actually manage factories. You want to ramp up production. Multinationals, they have the will and the way to do that if they already have contract manufacturing in Vietnam. But I just want to get back to the point. Actually, there are 2 points, Anson, and that is the theme of this is sustainability. And the question is, what do we do when people want better paying jobs? A few trends. Number one, countries are at different stages, and that's a big question for China. And the way China is dealing with that is through the economics of the manufacturing, where there's the really good manufacturers are digitizing and they're moving up the value chain. But what has to change is the owner mindset, and that is enhancing the documented processes, enhancing continuous improvement. When you get these enhancements in the factory, sometimes that leads to better paying jobs in the factory. Number two, this is a bottom-up approach to sustainability, because a lot of the discussion so far today and in other circles is, sustainability, it's got to come from top down. The corporation gets pressure from NGOs, from the consumers, from the financiers. But we don't think about that. What about the owner of the supplier? How are we changing their mindset? And that's one of the big sticking points, probably across the whole developing world, because the owners of a simple supplier or a factory, they just want to put food on the table for their family. They don't have in this mind about this sustainability thing. But one thing that I have been helping factories with in China, and that is working with owners to try and help minimize the wastage, because 10, 15, 20, 25% in instances of wastage coming off the end of an assembly line, because the suppliers don't have in place different specific processes and practices, even before we digitize, before we bring in AI. So there's a lot that can be done to help the owner, to actually educate, help in pro bono ways, which is what I've been doing when I'm visiting the factories in China.
Very good. Thank you, Neale. Again, there's just so many good points that we can talk about. As you said, that bottom-up approach to sustainability as well. Lindsay, I want to bring you in here as well, because we heard from John about how, if we're going to innovate, you need that disruption. How about from a Sarai point of view, and I think about technology, is technology going to save us? Are platforms like Sarai, are they the answer? Are they our saviors? What can you share with us?
Oh, great question, Anson. You're not going to get there without technology. That is for sure. Technology is the enabler, but you still need human action. You still need leadership to devote the necessary focus and resources to solve these bigger picture issues. And they have to see the value of collaboration with the entire value chain to instigate that change, because this is absolutely necessary to make that change. Supply chains have evolved for one reason over the years, and that's cost optimization. Why change now? And when I think about the results of our report with KPMG and how companies are tracking the right data today manually, that seems absurd to me. So Sarai's technology has already made a difference for our clients. We're making it easier for them to share data on their terms and make sure that it's pulled together in a consistent way. Our technology helps digitize and automate processes, which can result in a huge savings in time and effort. So a global fashion brand that we're working with, they were spending 1,000 hours manually collating data across a dozen suppliers for a single shipment. That was one of the reasons that they wanted to work with us, because they estimated Sarai cuts that time in half. And that's thanks to technology, but it's still people driving that technology at the end of the day.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. And yeah, absolutely. As you said, we're not going to get there without the technology as well. Rob, I'm just going to come back to you as well, because again, I've got lots of questions, and then I'll ask another question from the chat panel. I mean, retail supply, if I look at retail, if I look at, sourcing, it's very traditional. And I think it's fair to say that adoption has been very slow if we look at adopting more sustainable sourcing supply chains. Do you see things changing? Are they changing quick enough? And, I know from a TACE point of view, you really do live and breathe that whole area of sourcing far more sustainable products for the future.
Sure, it's a very good question, Anson. I think people are more mindful about what they're doing, but I think a very interesting thing that we, I guess, come up against as a purpose-led brand is sustainability has a cost. So this could be a labor cost, it could be a monetary cost, but I think the most important one is the environmental cost of what we're doing. So essentially, with our brand and where it is, by vertically integrating our supply chain, we're basically designing a distribution network that is being done holistically to minimize the carbon emissions. So a hyper-local of growing the product locally, manufacturing it locally for that market. And that's something that we want to span out into different markets over the course of this year. So I think the very good point is education is essential as a purpose-led brand. Consumers need to be aware why the product costs what it does, communicating that to all stakeholders. And I think very interesting what Lindsay was saying before, as a purpose-led brand and as a founder of an SME, leveraging technology is very important for us. When you've got a lot of things going on, you've got resources available, but where do you deploy them resources? So I think leveraging technology as a brand in our position is very important. We would get there anyway, but using this kind of innovation, we get there faster. And then when we get there faster, as I think the floor mentioned before, innovation needs that disruption. And what we're doing is very disruptive. So I think it's finding who your friends are and leveraging different stakeholders that are aligned with what you're trying to do and aligned for, as Andrew's mentioned before from PBEC, striving for this greater good. Everyone, I think, is trying to, make a positive difference. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at TACE. But, using these kind of tools and platforms, I think we get there faster.
Good point. Good point. Good point indeed. And as you said, being a purpose-led brand yourself, the recognition that, we need to leverage that technology. We need to be, we do need to be more innovative as well. John, I just want to bring you in because our mutual friend, Mr. Tyler Johnson, has joined us. And Tyler is a very good friend of mine. I think he's back in Texas these days, but Tyler and I worked, or we used to travel together across mainland China. Tyler was with Dell back in the day. A big impact on global trade, or did Trump have a bigger impact, John?
Trump had a bigger impact. Yes.
That's a short and sweet answer there. But as you said, if we look at, because you've been tracking, over many years, right? You were talking about how you chose the midpoint of George H.W. Bush in his presidency. For you, what have been the 2 or 3 very key issues, if we think about the timeline there, the global financial crisis, we talked about Trump, what's been in your view, what have been the big issues in the last few years?
Well, the last few years would be the pandemic and the trade wars. 2008, was more of a financial banking related. And I go back to, certainly to 9/11, from just a movement of people, passenger transportation. And then prior to that, I would say that, we used to always say WWW, and we don't say that anymore. Back to technology, that's just like electricity, the web is. And so certainly in the 90s and the connectivity, I worked, as I mentioned, in Sealand in the early 90s, and we sent proprietary emails to each other. Sealand used to do global business with telex machines. We don't do that. It's instant. I have WeChat. We're on this Zoom. It's just that. So technology, I was a computer science undergrad. So technology over that 30-year period, yes, Lindsay, we have a ways to go for transparency. One of the big companies in the United States right now that's in the news is Project 44. You may be familiar with. That's what they're about. You would think we would have this transparency figured out by now. Electronic data interchange and sharing information. So I think the technology and the connectivity, the speed of communication allowed the supply chains to almost be invisible. And we just took them for granted. And so I haven't seen a disruption bigger than what I'll just label as the trade war disruption. And then we lay the pandemic on top of a shaky global governance system. And, in the United States, we can't agree how to manage the pandemic, much less around the world. And we must get through that. But I think these two are the disruption. And what we're talking about now, whether it's diplomacy with supply chain practitioners there to help lead the conversation, or companies like KPMG or the Bush China Foundation organizations, we need to talk about the future and how are we going to make the world a better place, whether it's from an economic or an environmental perspective.
Good point, John. And as you said, we have seen a fair amount of the geopolitics, but again, as you mentioned earlier on, it really is going to be about us. It's going to be about the industry leaders coming together alongside academia, and with the help of Lindsay and those platforms, that's going to be really important as well. Tyler also picked up on an interesting point about new data privacy laws. And does that have an impact on supply chains? Lindsay, there are a couple of questions as well. I think Andrew and Jordan have got a couple of questions. So you're very popular, Lindsay. But just going back to data, again, you and I caught up face to face last week, and we were talking about the data question and the fact that data now is the new gold. People are calling it the new oil. Data is actually like the air that we breathe nowadays, right? There's so much of it, but what's your view on the data? Because there are some challenges with the data, and equally, I know we talk about collaboration, but John just made a good point, is we actually need to make sure we're sharing that information. We do actually, when we say we collaborate, we've got to be sharing a lot more of that information. Can we do it?
We can do it, Anson. We can do it, John. We need to rebuild trust through that collaboration, and we can do it through a digital way. Now, sometimes there is so much data, but we do have a ways to go in digitizing most of the supply chain. If you have the benefit of working with an incredibly large manufacturer, they're good at this. They're better than the brands who want to try and do it themselves. And now there is an issue if the data is not available. If it is available, let's come back to the report, Anson, because the top two issues from what our study said was they want to solve gaining end-to-end transparency and getting value out of data. There's so much noise in the data when companies are collecting it. Supply chains are so fragmented, and the consolidation and digitization of data is key to building more efficient and resilient supply chains. But you have to be able to trust where that data is going. How is that data going to be used? Is it going to be used against me if I'm a supplier? Are you going to cut me out of the supply chain? This is one of the key issues that when we talk to suppliers, they all want to know, do I have to share my pricing? And that's really the crux of it. Is there trust in that supply chain? Technology is going to be integral in building this trust, and companies don't have to reinvent the wheel to do it. So this also reminds me of a conversation Mike and I were having over WhatsApp earlier this week, and he shared a study with me around from ChainPro, and it highlighted that managing volumes of data for usability is one of the top challenges that suppliers face when it comes to visibility and transparency. That's a key issue because, you know, you've got to be able to leverage what data you have, the right information at the right time sent to the right person. And that's also where solutions like Sarai can come in. I saw Andrew's question, if I may.
Yes, please. I was going to ask you that does dovetail very nicely into Andrew's question, because Andrew was talking about the fact that, you know, he spent decades moving chemicals for a lot of those large corporations in the world. And they, of course, talk a lot about supply chain and the logistics side. But again, some corporates view transparency as a risk. Or what I would also say, Andrew, some corporates view information as, you know, it's their information, it's the holy grail, and it's their secret source, and therefore they don't want to share it. What's your view, Lindsay?
Well, you know, how do you bring that reality to life? If they want to protect what they have, that's their corporate mission. Is that going to help us get to net zero goals that certain leaders have claimed they'd make? No, it's not. But internally, within those large organizations and within the supply chain, you need to align your expectations. We're seeing a shift. This is, you know, becoming daily news. The daily headlines that we're reading is that transparency is key. And there are going to be continuing issues with geopolitical tensions that might heighten, but within an organization, big or small, you have to align your expectations. You need policy shifts that you can communicate externally so that your entire supply chain understands the importance of transparency, not only to your brand, but to your consumers, to your investors, for many reasons. Continuing to make public statements and making good on those public statements by maybe reshuffling your supply chain and looking at your strategy to either diversify or consolidate is critical. It's a journey. It does not happen overnight. And that is key. We have had some of these issues come up with visibility, and you know that's really important, that you give time to your supply chain to change. You have to bring them on the journey with you. And that's where collaboration and diplomacy will come back. But one final point, you can incentivize them as well. And that's where I think it gets really exciting when you look at how to finance a greener supply chain over time. I'll pause there.
Good point.
Anson, if I can just add on
Neale.
that. Andrew McCown, you've done some work with him, and he's doing some great work with Blockchain Asia, where they're trying to build out, you know, blockchain in the logistics. And the big thing that's coming out in terms of the data protection is just, or, you know, digitalization of the data in the supply chain is to try and we've got to improve the data collection and to fortify the security of data collection points in any particular supply chain. But just getting back to, you know, when there's a lot of pressure coming down, I'm very bottom up and very practical person. The NGOs are beating up on the MMCs every year and, you know, what are you doing with this? What are you doing with that? But we also want NGOs going into the factory and training up the new generation of factory leaders, like the Heinrich Foundation is doing. in Vietnam and what they're doing in other countries in Asia. We're actually training up students to become managers to go into the supply chain. And so, you know, the bottom-up process, we must not forget that.
Good point, Neil. Very good point. And I know that, of course, the Heinrich Foundation, they've also been very much involved with PBEC for many years, and Merle and the rest of the team. And they've been doing a lot of very good things over the last few years. Again, few questions. We're fast running out of time. I've still got loads of questions that I really want to ask all of you. So, John, we've now figured out that the technology is here. We've actually got the data. We've got more innovation because, of course, we've had this disruption. We've got the science. You know, we've got all of these. We've got all of these things happening, but what is missing in your view?
We need to be nice to each other.
Yeah, good point.
It's just like COVID is reminds us of our humanity. It seems so simple to me, but yet, like I say, I living in the United States, and I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and we've got to get along and cooperate. And so I hate to overuse collaborate, but I mean, I'm ready to come to China. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work with the Chinese team and cooperate and compete. And we call it co-opetition. So maybe that's how I'm trying to be succinct and not avoid the question. So we need to learn to cooperate and compete.
Yes, good point, John. Love that point. We do need that, and that cooperation is important. And as you said, we've all got to get on, right? We've only got one world. We've only got one planet. We need to get along together. Absolutely agree. Neil, how about your view? You know, we're going to talk about that. We've got all of these. We seem to have all the ingredients to bake this amazing cake, but what are we missing in your view?
Okay, right now, what do we do in the next month? You've got to find ways to get around the border controls, and that's just stopping the relationship. The big thing that, you know, we always talk about, there's managing risk, digitalization, and the relationship. We've covered some of the digitalization aspects, but the relationships, as what Lindsay says. And so I tell a lot of SMEs, I tell buyers that talk to me on advisory about getting access to different countries. You've got to develop relationships directly with the supplier, and with border closures, directly with the merchandiser that's acting on your behalf, or directly with a third-party auditor that's working on your behalf. Yeah, the relationship is critical on the supply chains to make them work. I think the general trend going bigger is, in order to control more of the new normal of the global supply chains, the firm may become reshaped. As I said in my data, it's shown there's a lot of contract manufacturing going on. Maybe the future firm is that there's greater ownership of the supply chain and not so much outsourcing of the supply chain, in order to, number one, control the data, in order to enhance the relationship, in order to get digitalization going into the supply chain.
Good point, Neil. Very good point. So again, collaborate, co-opetition, develop those relationships, talk to each other directly, pick up the telephone. That might be a good idea. Yeah, all of the above. Because, you know, there are some significant challenges, as we know, with regards to global trade. I've got lots of questions and we're out of time. Very quickly, I noticed that Jordan had a message or a question for you, Lindsay. It is so important what Sarai is doing to facilitate supply chains using technology. Could we set up a regional hub for ASEAN supply chains that could harmonize regulatory and cost for suppliers in this region, Lindsay? Can you do it? You're on mute, Lindsay. That's the quote of 2021.
Oh, that's so 2021 of me.
That's so 2021 of you.
We can do it, Jordan. We can do it, Anson. I think it needs to be done because it comes back to having a clarity of what standards can be met and how. We need to join forces to do that. Let's
Absolutely.
do it,
Can be done, Lindsay. Can do. Again, we're out of time. My final question, and by the way, I've failed miserably because I did have about 6 more questions. Let's just think about the senior executives that are joining us today at the PBEC virtual meeting. What should they be thinking about? And if I can ask everybody, you know, what's the one thing, John, what should all of our colleagues across the PBEC world, what should we be thinking about? You know, when we're looking forward to the future, obviously.
I think the theme and the conversation that we've had in the last, hour and 15 minutes has hit on much of that. Certainly when I prioritize the sort of the 3 major focuses of the supply chain diplomacy, I talk about, or we talk about reducing cost and disinflation, this whole global inflation piece. And I think when we were doing our warm up last week, but it's the trust piece. And that's the cooperation and sitting down at the table with an attitude of we're going to solve this and make it better. And then the environment and the sustainability piece factored into that. And so I think we're touching on the competitive strategies, the value that supply chains can provide. So that's more the efficiency, and then the trust, the diplomacy is the reason we use that word diplomacy. But practice, we can all be diplomats. And then let's think about the plan. When I think about my 28-year-old daughter, it's the sustainability, Rob.
Yeah, good point. Let's think about the planet and let's be nice to each other. It doesn't cost us anything to be nice, does it?
No.
Very good point. Thanks, John. Neale, just in terms of wrapping up, what's the key message for all of us?
Key message. We talk about digitalization, automation, and we talk about all of these good things, but really all of that trend reduces relationships and value exchange down to transactional operations, which we don't want to get away from this whole idea that when we're working with a supplier, it's all about a value exchange. It's all about helping the supplier do better so they can save costs, so they can be more sustainable. Rather than barking orders at them, I would tell C-suite managers, think of ways of how you can actually train the supplier and help the supplier improve. And then they'll become more sustainable, and then your other end of the value chain becomes more sustainable.
Yeah, we are in it together, Neale.
Yeah,
I think that is the key message, right? And it goes back to the fact that we really do need to collaborate. And good point, of course, the digitization, the automation, the technology, they are enablers, right? They're going to help us to get there. But
right.
Hey, we're going to have to communicate and talk and collaborate together as well. Lindsay, your final comments.
I want to
What should we be thinking about?
You should be thinking, what is my data strategy for supply chain transparency and sustainability? And how are my suppliers incentivized to do better business with me?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, right? It costs money to do these things, and we have to find a way. We can't just say, hey, you've got to do this. We gotta say, hey, we've got to do this. That's going to be really, really important. And Rob, just a final word from yourself, my friend. What should we be thinking about for 2022 and beyond?
I think big picture, Anson. I think summary, change making via education. Everyone's aware of the problem. we're aware of, climate change and striving towards carbon neutrality, I think is bringing it home, and how can people actually, instead of, listening to the noise, actually take change. Our foundation, we're using the bamboo as a carbon offset mechanism to enable brands and individuals to use that as an offset, actually, finding solutions to the problem, big or small, any change makes a difference. And I think everyone collaborating together and striving forwards for the greater good. And yeah, collaboration is key, I think is my final point.
Good point. Very good point. Working together for the greater good. I like that point as well to end on, Rob. And as you said, change making by education. We all of us have got to come together, and we've also got to learn a lot more about the need for more sustainable supply chains for the future. As I said, the perfect storm is here. Climate change, climate emergency. It's here, it's happening, right? We're all concerned about our future generations and our kids and our grandkids. And equally, I think we're seeing the bankers now get it. They are now very clearly saying and mandating that if you don't have that sustainable agenda, we are not going to give you those loans. The government are starting to regulate. We're going to see, I think, a lot more regulation in the future. And Mike, no doubt for a future PBEC webinar, we can delve down more looking at those different regulations that are coming down. But what I would say to everybody is that businesses will increasingly need to compete on transparency, on trust, and they're going to have to look at their purpose agenda as well. We all need to be compassionate and purpose driven. I think that's very fundamental. And as John mentioned earlier on, we really do need to be nice to each other. Let's talk together and look at solving those issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time, we're over time, but I'm sure you'll agree this has been such a good session. There's loads of great insights. I personally want to thank John. I want to thank Neale. I want to thank, of course, Lindsay and Rob for adding to this really great debate and great dialogue. I apologize if I haven't answered all of those questions, but what we will do is we will come back to you on a couple of those other points. So Tyler, don't worry, we'll respond. And James, any other comments or questions you have, we'll look at responding. On that note, Mike, back to you for a very, very quick wrap up from the PBEC side.
Thank you, Anson, and thank you to all the panelists. I've certainly been taking pages of notes, lots of insights, some great takeaways, which we can write up as a summary. This will be going out as a recording in the coming weeks, and we'll, as we say, we get back to some of those people who didn't get their questions answered today. And thank you to you for joining. So until next time, look out on the PBEC website or in your email box for the next event. Thank you so much for joining. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe and stay well.
The Value Prop Show is brought to you by PBEC, the Pacific Basin Economic Council. Your co-hosts are Miguel Aboites and Michael Walsh from PBEC. You can follow us and subscribe on our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Thanks for watching and listening, and see you in the next episode.